So let's talk about Talk to Me. As a fan of the horror genre, this year has been pretty poor. I don't think there's been particularly many horrors that come out, but the ones that have been released have all been, not great. And we're kind of getting into now that season of horror films where they all kind of drop, from now until probably like October, September time. We'll have a lot more horrors coming out, for better and for worse. The slate for them doesn't look great. I think Evil Dead Rises is probably the best horror that's come out so far. But until now, I'd say, Talk to Me, for me, is definitely the best horror of this year. It does have its issues, it's not perfect, but it is, for the most part, a very good horror. So it follows essentially a bunch of teenagers who decide to fuck around with a stone hand that lets you see the dead, speak to the dead, and even let them possess you, with a little catch where you can only really let them possess you for around 90 seconds before, you're done for life. There's definitely a few things that particularly stand out for me, mainly in the first half of the film. The comedic writing is the first thing, which is really good. The sections of them just playing this game, essentially, they are really, really funny. It helps that they know how to write dialogue for teenagers and kids, because normally that's a really big issue. Pretty much any film that comes out that has like a main cast of teenagers is they all just have the worst dialogue. But here it works really well. It's really quite funny for the most part. It also uses even social media as a whole. It's used well, and it doesn't. They don't use shitty fake names for stuff, and they use it properly. It's really quite the way they use phones, but everyone's always just on their phone when everything's going on. It's quite funny. The film avoids cliches for the most part as well, which is a nice breath of fresh air, all things considered, with the genre. Or you kind of want a film to be a little more original now with horror, because everything just kind of seems the same. And with Talk to Me, it doesn't feel like the generic shitty horror you get all the time. The cliche for me, especially that it avoids, is making the whole cast of side characters expendable. They're not fodder. These guys are, from the film from start to finish, for the most part, apart from a few characters that kind of just dip the scenes just randomly. But for the most part, they all stick around. They carry on developing these people, and it definitely helps. You kind of respect them going into it. These guys are just gonna end up dying in like a little section near the end. You have like a whole thing of scene set up, a jump scare, death, scene set up, jump scare, death. That kind of shit, and that doesn't happen, thankfully. Because it is quite, I would say, scary as such, but it definitely has its moments. For two first-time directors, it's a really good debut film, especially in terms of directing these horror sequences. The tone and the atmosphere is set up really well, and it's executed very well. The film looks good, sounds good. Also, a big fan of the practical effects they use. Some of them are fucking gruesome as well, and they look good. They do look good. And then the ending for me. The ending is great. I really, really like the ending. I'm not too much of a fan of the last 15 minutes of the film before that ending, but the actual ending itself was cut together and shot really well. It's not perfect, and my main issue is this second half of this film. It's good that they didn't go with a more cliche route, but it feels like they didn't really have much of an idea what to do in those last 20-25 minutes or so. There's a lot of random stuff that happens, a lot of this kind of bouncing back and forth between a hospital and houses, and it just kind of all builds up to this ending that is good, but the build-up doesn't particularly seem, part of it does feel a little bit rushed here and there. Once, they don't need to play the actual game anymore, it loses its focus a little bit. But, and, the performances as well, like the directors, these guys, a lot of these performances are people who haven't particularly had many roles in major films before, so the performances can be a bit 50-50, but it's kind of expected, and it's not something that actually takes you out of the film, or it's not the biggest of problems. So overall, it's definitely worth a watch if you've got the time. It kind of has a little funky release date with Barbie and Oppenheimer still pulling in numbers, even Mission Impossible 7 still out. But if you have the chance to see this, I would definitely recommend It's nice and easy, you know, an hour and a half pretty much, you know. Doesn't overstay its welcome, gets to the point quickly, it's creepy, and it is surprisingly funny. So this will get a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and have a good one.